11, Gareth Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Transport, does he stand by his statement, the public will have a say on transport matters, and will he allow the Auckland Council to make its own transport funding decisions?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, in answer to the first part, yes, and in answer to the second part, to the extent that they involve council funding streams paid for by ratepayers. There is, of course, an enduring notion that central government is responsible for taxation and taxpayer assets, and local government is responsible for rates income and ratepayer assets. Therefore, it is understandable that central government might have a view, especially when the proposition is to add new taxes, that could be a significant drag on economic growth.
Gareth Hughes.
Given the government has insufficient funding for projects like the CBD rail loop under the government's own public transport infrastructure activity class under their government policy statement, does he support the Auckland Council investigating alternative funding arrangements for transport projects?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, I disagree with the first part of the premise of that member's question. The reality is the government has taken a decision that if there is rail infrastructure projects to be funded, and we're of course currently funding very, very significant rail infrastructure projects, in fact the greatest investment since about the mid-1970s, then that will make the decision to do those directly from the consolidated fund. But we of course do support Auckland Council looking for funding streams, but again I think you have to look at that in the context of the answer, my primary answer, which is the distinction between central government taxation and local government rates generating powers.
Gareth Hughes.
Given the Minister's already ruled out a regional fuel tax, does he agree with government papers released under the Official Information Act which state that it would make sense for the Auckland Council to consider new and innovative approaches to funding and financing infrastructure, including congestion charges?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, I think you'll find that that was actually released on a website rather than under the OIA. But there are a number of ways that local government could, for example, consider ways of raising revenue if it did so. There's, of course, rates, targeted rates, income from its various assets and balance sheet development contributions, borrowing, PPPs, parking charges. All those things are within the purview of a local council.
Gareth Hughes.
To the Minister, is it smart to be spending $19.3 billion on state highways when we know traffic on our roads is falling, petrol over the long term is going up, and rail patronage in Auckland has grown by more than 20% in the last year?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
I think, Mr. Speaker, the member probably inadvertently provides some of the perils of working in percentages, because even though the rail patronage is growing, it's off a very, very low base, as the member knows. About 1.5% of travel in Auckland is by rail. So yes, a 20% increase would take it, by my calculations, to maybe 1.8 versus about 80 or 90% currently on the roads. So I think he's got to be very careful with percentages and suggest that he might take that approach.
The Honourable Shane Jones.
Transport. How does the Minister think that remedying transport woes in Auckland is going to be advanced by him antagonising and seeking to publicly daily humiliate the Mayor of Auckland, Len Brown?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's a bit rich coming from the member, but certainly not in the process of seeking to humiliate the Mayor of Auckland. But can I point out again, it is important that we approach all these projects with a certain amount of logic and detachment, because the project that both members are talking about currently has a BC ratio of about 0.3. And that's probably the issue they should take to addressing before they address the funding options. In terms of Pūhoi to Wellsford, seeing as the member asked, currently around a BC of around 1 to 1.3.
Gareth Hughes.
Minister of Transport, why does he continue to act as if he knows what's best for Auckland, given yet another Herald Digipol out last month found that the CBD rail link had more support than his holiday highway, both from Aucklanders and non-Aucklanders?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I wouldn't, of course, presume to act on behalf of all Aucklanders. I think that's quite difficult to do. But being an Aucklander of myself, I think I'm a little bit aware of some of the issues and challenges that are faced there. But again, I think it is important that the member focus on actually establishing which projects are going to achieve real economic gains in Auckland. Now, the best and the most independent analysis of the CBD rail loop currently suggests it would only take about 1,500 to 2,000 cars off the road a day. And I think that would be a very small return for around a $2.3 billion investment. And that's probably the sort of work that the member needs to address if he seeks to promote this project.
Gareth Hughes.
Why does the Minister continue to only show this Parliament one side of the story and deny the findings of the actually independent review commissioned by Auckland Council, which was reviewed by PricewaterhouseCoopers, Parsons Brinkerhoff, John Bolin Consultating, ME Market Economics, Becker, GHD, Ascari, ACOM and Berkeley Transportation Centre, and how many international reviewers reviewed the government's CBD Rail Link report?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr. Speaker, some of those consultants are, of course, known public transport advocates. Others aren't. But again, the point of this is that, and by the way, their stuff was actually a policy case as to how they could possibly improve the business case for that project. But I think the member, unless he's suggesting something else, would recognise that both the Ministry of Transport and Treasury are reasonably dispassionate observers of this stuff. If you're saying the public service is biased, then you should probably get up and say so.
Gareth Hughes, is it a point of order? Gareth Hughes, point of order.
Sir, I acknowledge it was a very long question, but the rub of the question was, did anyone review the government's report?
Well, if he'd just asked that question, we might be able to get the answer to that, but as the member acknowledges, there was a lot more stuff in the question. Gareth Hughes, supplementary.
Why does the Minister continue to be the roadblock to Auckland's smart transport aspirations, and when will he heed the advice of the Herald editorial to mind your own business on the rail loop, Mr. Joyce?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've just sort of respectfully observed that actually probably the Minister of Transport does have an interest in Auckland transport. I mean, it's a weird concept, but possibly it's true. But can I also say it is very, very important that when you call things smart transport, Mr. Hughes, you have to come up with a better answer than a 30 cent in the dollar return on a project. That is not smart transport, that's pouring money down a hole.
Question number 12, Sumaroni.